On January 30th, 2026, the world watched gold collapse in real time. A historic crash, the worst in nearly half a century. Billions vanished overnight. Silver fell even harder. Panic filled every headline. But while everyone was staring at the price charts, something far more disturbing happened quietly in the background. The U.S. Department of Justice uploaded millions of pages of Jeffrey Epstein's files without warning. And hidden deep inside those documents was one single email. An email that opened a door to a question no government once asked: is America S gold really still inside Fort Knox? Most people believe Fort Knox is untouchable, a legendary vault, a symbol of American wealth, a place so secure that it has become a metaphor for safety itself. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Almost nobody alive has actually seen what's inside. Fort Knox is not open to the public. No tours, no cameras, no transparency. And the last time the United States conducted a truly comprehensive audit of its gold reserve, 1953. I'll let that sink in. The government audits citizens every year. Businesses get inspected, banks get regulated, taxes get reviewed. Yet the largest gold stockpile on Earth has gone over 70 years without full independent verification. That alone should make anyone pause, because gold is not just metal, gold is trust. It is the foundation behind currencies, behind global confidence, behind the belief that a nation can pay its debts. So what happens when that trust becomes questionable? When politicians promise transparency and then suddenly stop talking? When senators request access and get ignored? When the most powerful people on earth mention Fort Knox publicly and then fall into silence? The problem isn't that we have proof the gold is missing. The problem is something worse. We have no proof that it isn't. And in finance, uncertainty is gasoline. Once people begin to doubt reserves, they stop trusting paper promises. They start wanting something real, something physical. That's how panic begins. That's how gold demand explodes. That's how the price climbs far beyond what anyone expected. Now, before you roll your eyes and assume this is just another conspiracy, stop. Because the email itself isn't the evidence. It's the trigger. It's the match that accidentally exposed decades of unanswered questions. The message was sent to Jeffrey Epstein in June of 2011. The subject line, European Union Times. Inside was a forwarded article with a shocking headline claiming America's gold was gone. And to be clear, that article came from a discredited source. Fact checkers called it nonsense. No government has verified the extreme claims. So why does it matter? Because underneath the sensationalism, the real documented facts are terrifying enough. A powerful IMF director was arrested under bizarre circumstances and later cleared. A sitting U.S. senator cannot enter Fort Knox. A Treasury secretary verified America's gold with a tweet. Germany waited years to retrieve its own gold from U.S. storage. And in 2025, Elon Musk and Donald Trump publicly promised an inspection, then suddenly went silent. That's not internet rumor. That's public record. And when the most powerful institutions refuse transparency, people start asking the one question that changes everything. If the gold is there, why not prove it? One audit, one live stream, one independent verification. It would end every rumor instantly, but they won't do it. And every day they refuse, gold becomes more valuable because the market doesn't run on certainty. It runs on doubt, and doubt is spreading faster than ever. By the end of this story, you'll understand why some analysts believe gold isn't headed for $6,000, but for $10,000 an ounce. And this entire story started with one email buried in a file almost nobody noticed. Let's slow down for a moment, because this is where the story stops being internet noise and starts becoming something much more uncomfortable. The email was real, not a rumor, not a screenshot, not something pulled from a random forum. It was sitting inside a PDF uploaded directly to the official website of the United States Department of Justice. Buried deep in millions of pages released quietly to the public, one message stood out. Not because it proved anything by itself, but because it opened a door that most people never even thought to look behind. The email was sent in June of 2011. The sender's name was redacted. The recipient was Jeffrey Epstein. The subject line referenced the European Union Times. And inside was a forwarded article with a headline that immediately sounded unbelievable. It claimed America's gold at Fort Knox was missing. Now, let's be clear. The article itself came from an unreliable source. Fact checkers dismissed it. Major outlets called it nonsense. No government has confirmed the extreme accusations inside it. So why does this matter? Because underneath the sensational claims, the email accidentally pointed toward real documented events. Events that raise questions powerful people have spent decades avoiding. The article mentioned a man named Dominique Strauss-Kahn. Most people don't remember that name today, but in 2011, he was one of the most influential financial figures on the planet. He was the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. The IMF isn't just another institution. It sits at the center of the global financial system. It monitors national economies, oversees debt negotiations, and quietly shapes the rules of international money. The person leading it has access to information most governments never reveal publicly. Strauss-Kahn was, quite literally, one of the men who understood where the world's money and gold truly stood. And then, suddenly, everything collapsed. On May 14th, 2011, Strauss-Kahn was arrested at JFK Airport in New York, pulled off a plane, accused of assaulting a hotel worker. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Front pages, breaking news, global scandal. His career was destroyed overnight. His political ambitions in France were fenilled before they began. The most powerful financial official in the world was removed from the stage instantly. But here's the part that rarely gets remembered. The criminal charges were eventually dropped. Investigators found serious problems with the accuser's credibility. The case unraveled. Strauss-Kahn later settled a civil lawsuit, but legally, the dramatic public takedown ended with the criminal accusations collapsing. So the world watched a financial titan fall, and then watched the legal foundation beneath it disappear. Even Vladimir Putin publicly questioned whether the arrest was a setup. Polls showed that many French citizens suspected something deeper almost immediately. And one journalist after another noted how strange the entire sequence of events felt. Now, there is no confirmed evidence that Strauss-Kahn discovered anything about Fort Knox. But the documented fact remains. One of the most powerful financial leaders on Earth was removed under circumstances that later fell apart legally. That alone is unsettling. Then the story gets stranger. Just days after Strauss-Kahn's arrest, another international banker in New York faced nearly the same type of accusation. Same city, same week. Similar scandal. Their case also collapsed. Coincidence? Maybe. But when two powerful men connected to global finance are taken down in the same city, in the same way, within days of each other, it doesn't require conspiracy to notice how unusual that is. Now, let's move to the real center of this story, Fort Knox. Inside, the government claims, sits over 147 million ounces of gold, worth more than $800 billion at today's prices. It is described as the largest single stash of gold on Earth. At least, it is supposed to be. Fort Knox does not allow public tours. Even high-ranking officials have been denied entry. Senator Mike Lee has said he has repeatedly been blocked from accessing it, despite having clearance to enter military bases across the country. A United States senator cannot simply walk in. And here's the number that changes everything. The last full comprehensive public audit of Fort Knox happened in 1953, more than 70 years ago. Think about that. The government audits citizens constantly. Taxes, businesses, charities. Everything is inspected, verified, documented. But the largest gold reserve in human history has not been independently audited in generations. In 1974, a small group of journalists and congressmen were shown part of the vault. They saw gold bars, but they did not conduct a full count. They did not test the bars. They did not drill them. They looked and they left. That was more than 50 years ago. In 2017, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin visited Fort Knox. When he came out, he posted a tweet saying he was glad the gold was safe. That was the verification. A tweet. No public report, no independent audit, no transparency, just trust. And then, in 2025, something remarkable happened. Elon Musk publicly questioned whether the gold had ever been stolen or compromised. He suggested live streaming an inspection of Fort Knox. Donald Trump, speaking aboard Air Force One, told reporters that the government would go into Fort Knox to make sure the gold was there. Senator Rand Paul formally requested access and pushed for an inspection. 3 extremely powerful voices. One simple promise. Open the vault. Show the world. And then, silence. Musk stopped mentioning it. Trump never brought it up again. Rand Paul's deadline passed with no response. The Treasury ignored the request. A transparency bill was introduced in Congress calling for an independent audit, drilling bars, counting reserves, publishing results, and it went nowhere. It sits collecting dust. And this is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. If the gold is there, proving it would be easy. One audit, one day. Independent observers, cameras, reports. It would end every rumor instantly. So the question remains, if the answer is good, why refuse to show it? That question, more than any conspiracy headline, is what keeps this story alive. Because silence is not proof of guilt. But silence, at this scale, is not nothing. And every day that door stays closed, the world keeps wondering what's really behind it. Now we arrive at the most important part of this entire story. Because the Fort Knox mystery is not just about what may or may not be inside a vault. It's about what the United States government may eventually need gold to become. Here is the number that changes everything. The U.S. Treasury still officially values its gold reserves at $42 per ounce. Yes, 42. That valuation was set in the early 1970s. Gold today trades above $5,000. So on government balance sheets, America's gold is recorded as being worth roughly $6 billion. When its real market value is closer to $800 billion, that gap is not a typo. It is one of the largest accounting distortions in modern financial history. Now ask yourself this. What happens if the United States decides to revalue its gold? Not by printing money, not by raising taxes, not by cutting programs, but simply by updating the price of its gold to reality. Overnight, the Treasury's balance sheet would expand by hundreds of billions of dollars. And with U.S. national debt now above $38 trillion, some analysts believe this isn't optional. It's inevitable. And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. If the government needs gold to be worth more, then they have no incentive to suppress the price. At $10,000 an ounce, America's gold reserve would be worth over $1.6 trillion. That is not conspiracy, that is mathematics. But there is another force pushing gold higher even faster. China. While Americans debate audits and vault doors, China is behaving as if the answer is already clear. They have been dumping U.S. Treasury bonds for years, hundreds of billions pulled out. At the same time, they have been buying physical gold month after month without stopping. They built their own global payment system. They strengthened control over silver supply. They are preparing for a world where paper trust collapses. And if even a 1% doubt exists about America's gold reserves, every nation holding dollars will ask the same question. Do we really want to rely on promises? Or do we want metal in our own vaults? That is why central banks are buying gold at record pace. That is why demand is exploding. And that is why the crash you saw in January may not have been the end, but the beginning. Even Wall Street banks saw it. After the worst gold crash in decades, not one major institution declared gold finished. Instead, they raised targets. JP Morgan pushed projections higher. Research firms openly discussed $10,000 gold within the decade. The biggest players on Earth looked at the collapse and said, buy. So when you combine all of this, the unanswered audit question, the silence of powerful leaders, the government's incentive to revalue, China's relentless accumulation, and institutional forecasts pointing upward, you don't get a conspiracy theory, you get a roadmap, and the destination looks a lot like $10,000 gold. Now let me be completely honest with you. That Epstein email does not prove Fort Knox is empty. The forwarded article was from an unreliable source, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling fear, not facts. But here's what is real. 70 plus years without a full independent audit is real. A senator being ignored for requesting transparency is real. Germany waiting years for its own gold is real. 3 of the most powerful men on earth promising an inspection and going silent, that is real. The truth is, this story would be so easy to end. 1 audit, 1 live stream, 1 independent report. Count the bars, test a few. Publish the results. Done. It would cost less than what the government spends in minutes. So the question becomes unavoidable. If everything is fine, why refuse? And that refusal is what the market hears loudest. Because gold is not just about wealth. It's about trust. And once trust cracks, people don't run toward paper. They run toward something they can hold. So I want to ask you directly. Do you believe Fort Knox should be fully audited? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments. Because the more people ask, the harder it becomes for silence to remain the strategy. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. The Epstein email wasn't proof. It was a spotlight. It didn't create the fire. It revealed the fuel that was already stacked for decades. A vault that hasn't been fully verified in generations. A financial system that books gold at $42 in a $5,000 world. A government drowning in debt with every incentive for gold to rise. A global rival buying physical metal as fast as possible. And leaders who promised transparency, then disappeared into silence. That is why this story matters. Because if the gold is there, the solution is simple. Open the door. Show the world. End every rumor forever. But they won't, and every day they don't. The price climbs, not because of 1 email, but because the world is waking up to the fact that trust is no longer enough. Gold doesn't need conspiracy. Gold only needs doubt. And doubt is spreading. In my next video, I'm going to show you something almost nobody is talking about. Gold has only crashed like this 2 other times in history. And both times, what followed was the biggest bull run of that generation. When you see the pattern, you'll understand why this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And share this with one person who still thinks Fort Knox is just a legend. Because the hidden economy is no longer hidden. It's unfolding right in front of us.